most forests that are managed, you have what you call a forest management plan, and that's sort of your 40,000 foot view of how am I going to start to satisfy the goals and objectives of the landowner through my management. How am I going to manipulate the stands to achieve those certain goals, whether it be timber income or managing for deer habitat, say, or recreation. How am I going to actually manage the forest as a whole to do that? And that's sort of the high level view. So this forest has a management plan. It specifies about how much wood we're going to harvest every year, from which areas we're going to think we're going to harvest, the silvicultural treatments that we will use in our management, how we're going to address those other values like wildlife habitat for certain species, biodiversity factors, recreation, other things. So again, that's the general overview. But then when it actually comes down to it, most of what forestry is manipulating vegetation in some manner or another. And during a commercial timber harvest, we're cutting trees that we can merchandise and sell. And we do that here to fund our operations. So to do that, once we've decided under the management plan which areas we're going to harvest, we have to develop what's called a harvest plan. And that's sort of that's the details of how I get an individual harvest done to satisfy, so we have an outcome that meets those goals and objectives that we have laid out in the management plan, but on that particular harvest. So say we've got a 10-acre block over here, and I designated this for harvest, and I come up with my prescription. I say it's going to be a shelter wood, and the harvest plan describes how that harvest is going to take place, and it's a document that is going to be used by us as the foresters and shared with the harvesting contractor, so the logger that's actually cutting down the trees. And that's going to contain information like the types of trees that will be harvested and how they will be marked or designated. So if I have decided to paint trees and tell them which ones to cut, I'll say that in there. I'll specify the paint color, and so trees with blue on them means cut them down. Sometimes we paint trees to leave and say cut everything else, so we use yellow for that. So paint to leave is yellow, so if I'm doing a harvest where I'm not leaving many trees for a certain reason, easier to paint the ones to leave than the ones to cut. So we do both. Sometimes we do a combination, particularly if I'm picking out some legacy or reserve trees of a certain species. Maybe I want to leave some big aspen, and I'll say cut all the big aspen except for the ones that are painted yellow. So that kind of information will be in there. Usually the contact information of the various people involved, the cell phone numbers of everybody if you have questions or need to get a hold of everybody, that kind of information is in there. There's a map, very importantly, of the harvest area. There'll be a map of the harvest area and a description of how it will be laid out and marked. So what's the flagging color going to be that shows the edge of the harvest area? What are if I'm near a property boundary, how is the property boundary marked? I don't want to cut on the neighbor's property. It's called a timber trespass, and those are never fun. How are the skid trails laid out? So the trails we're actually going to extract the wood. Have we flagged those out or laid those out in advance, and how are those marked? What kind of flagging color is going to happen? Usually we have some things we go through. We look for sensitive areas, so are there rare plants or animals on the site, how those will be protected. Sometimes there's special features like archaeological sites or a cellar hole or an old well or something that's a tree that's important to the landowner. That'll be designated on the map, and also how they'll be marked out in the field. So those kind of information. So the harvest plan is actually, how do we get this done on the ground, okay? In my management plan, I decided we're going to cut here this year, but the harvest plan is, how am I actually going to do it? How's the team going to cooperate? The forester, the logger, and the landowner to satisfy the goals and objectives. So the way we do that is, usually I write the harvest plan, and then I hand it off to one of my operations guys, Robin and Charlie, and they translate it for the logger and hand it to them, and work with the logging contractor, if they're not actually the logging contractor, which they are sometimes, and communicate it to them with the key information. So everybody's on the same page. And then when something goes wrong, there's not a whole lot of this going on, right? Well, you said that, and you said that, and you said that. It's all written down, so everybody's. Hopefully, we keep that to a minimum. So that's the harvest. That's the harvest plan. We should introduce Robin.
Yeah, let's introduce Robin.
Hi. How you doing?
Hi, Robin. Welcome. So you haven't met Robin Avery yet. So do you want to say a little bit about what you do for the University Forest? He's one of Keith's staff.
Sure. I'm the operations manager on the forest, and as Keith said, he writes the management plans, and Charlie and I see that they get implemented, and we oversee 15,000 acres, 16,000 acres,
14 plus or minus.
14,000 acres of forest.
Depends what the GIS is doing that there.
We do most of our own road repairs, road construction, things like that, boundary line work. Charlie's job, Charlie's in charge of boundary line work, does a lot of that by himself and the students. Oversee the contractors we have here on the forest, from the Demerit Forest to Presque Isle, Maine. We manage land all over the state. So keeps us running around, it keeps us pretty busy, and maintain most of our own equipment, like the skidder. We get a tractor, a bulldozer, snowmobiles to groom with, so we have a lot of maintenance issues that we deal with.
And everything we have is shiny and brand new,
Yeah.
like everybody else.
Yeah, I was just thinking about this
Like
thing on the
the
way over,
cable
how
scooter.
old this is. It's a 1984 and it's 36 years old, It's pretty unbelievable that a piece of equipment will last that long, but that's just an example. If you take care of something and maintain it, how long it'll really last. Iron does last a long time, as long as you maintain it. So.
There's one piece of plastic on that, and it's a little cover that goes over the instrument panel.
Right.
Everything else is steel or rubber.
And everything you buy for these, if they come in a package that says John Deere, you pay about 3 times as much for the package as you do for the part. About how it works with everything. So primarily that's what I do. I've worked on the forest. This is my 24th season. It's been a joy to be here, working with students.
And you're phasing out into
I am. I'm
retirement,
going to be
right?
gone in July, but I hope to come back and do workshops for the university and stay involved.
So will you be a contractor then, or
Most of it will be volunteer work. I think.
volunteer? Oh, that works well with the
I like
budget.
It's too hard to get paid by the university.
So before the 24 years here, Robin was a logging contractor for what, 20 plus years.
23 years I was a logging contractor for Champion International. I came here, I worked in the forest industry for 23 years and worked as a trainer and supervisor for the certified logging program and trained loggers throughout the state, did logging inspection before I came here. So kind of seen all aspects of the logging industry and moved from industry to education, which is really nice.
And we'll talk a lot about the safety aspect here as we get into the fellowing and stuff like that.
I was going to say, you had mentioned the income is important to the University Forest. Can you say a little bit more about how the profits from your timber sales are
Sure.
used?
So when we sell wood, we either cut it ourselves or sell stumpage, which is basically selling the tree standing on the stump to somebody, and then they cut it and haul it to the mill, and just pay it for us, pay us for it, pay us for it as it stands in the woods. So we are partially self-funded. The university pays our salaries, but we have to pay them back $51,000 every year. So October 1st, we start the budget $51,000 in the hole, and we have to earn that back to the university through our timber sales. And we have to make an operating budget. They don't give us any operating funds. We've got a few little gift accounts over at the foundation. They give us some interest, but mostly putting gas in the skidder, putting fuel in the trucks, buying new pickups, maintaining the boundary lines, grooming the ski trails. That's all funded by timber harvest revenue. So cutting the trees, if these trails be here, and lets us do classes like this, and that's what.
Student employees?
What's that?
Student employees?
And we hire student employees as well. Yeah. So we have 6 or 7 students working for us right now. Mostly all forestry majors, right?
I think this time, yeah.
Yeah, but that's not always the case. And they will help us with the management of the forest. We have them out doing a lot of pre-commercial thinning this year, so running brush saws, some invasive control projects. They'll probably be out doing boundary lines with Charlie, inventory as we need it.
They're
for
doing
those
some
sort of
harvesting
things.
too.
Yeah, and they cut some wood too. Yep. So that's where the money goes, from the trees.
Plus a few scholarship funds.
And it goes a lot of places actually. There's some lots that we cut that go to fund scholarships. There's some that part of the money goes to research. So we try and run kind of lean and mean and use up our stuff before we buy new, and try and keep a pretty efficient operation if we can.
One thing the University Forest doesn't do is throw anything away.
Yeah.
We have a stockpile that we need to get into that. We can go paw through it, find something we need. We usually do.
Well, we did have this dump truck that we got rid of, but we gave it to the farm, so that's like the next step down. So, yeah, no, we do a lot of our own fabrication and repairs, such as it is. And that is not pretty, but we make it work.
Is there any paperwork you need to do before you
Yep.
start cutting trees?
So part of the harvest plan, good question. You've done this before, you remember what I forget to say. In the state of Maine, there's no permit required to harvest timber in the state of Maine, except for some very specific circumstances. But we have to file what's called a Forest Operations Notification, or a FONS, which is and you get a number assigned to your harvest. So you have to fill out a form with information about your harvest, where it is, how big it is, if there's any sensitive resources nearby, like water bodies, or endangered species or anything like that. And you send that into the state, and they give you a 6-digit number, and you paint it on a tree or tack a sign up. And that should be at your main wood yard. We're cutting one tree here. We're not going to have one, but. And what that does is, so that information goes to the state district foresters who work for the state and the forest rangers. So they can come up and check on logging jobs to make sure that all the environmental laws are being complied with and those sorts of things. It also triggers at the end of the year a year-end landowner report. So we have to report on how much wood we sold and what the prices were that we got for it. That stuff's all confidential at the Forest Service, so they couldn't give that information out to another landowner if they asked for it. But what they do is aggregate that statewide, and they publish a few things from that. So it helps them keep track of the wood supply in the state, because there's a system of plots out there that the state uses to track growth and mortality statewide, and harvest levels is another component of is this information from these forest operation notifications. So it keeps it's a $6 billion industry. You kind of want to have an idea of what your inventory is doing, and that's why they do that. So that triggers the FONS triggers a year-end landowner report to do, and Robin usually at the end of the year summarizes all our harvest and totals up the volumes, and then we send that information off to the state, and they helps them keep track of that stuff.
And that usually gives them a better idea, county by county, how much wood it's selling for.
Yep.
And they also have a price sheet.
Yeah, there's a stumpage report.
Stumpage report that comes out every year with new pricing on it, and usually it's pretty accurate. Sometimes the numbers are a little skewed, but they're usually pretty accurate numbers by the state, so it's a good reference if you need to look up stumpage numbers. You can get that right online.
I assume you also report what type of harvest it is?
So there's the silvicultural activities report as part of that. It's very broad categories. Basically, it's like shelter wood, thinning, clear cut. It's not too finely grained. We also have to report pre-commercial activities we did, such as planting. Thinning we didn't make any money on, so pre-commercial thinning, where the trees weren't big enough, it actually cost us money to cut them. And herbicide work that we do. So spraying to release certain species or controlling invasive species or things like that. And they keep track of those acreages as well.
You can file the funds online now, isn't there? a new report?
Not quite yet.
Oh,
It's coming.
Okay, I thought I saw
If
something.
it hasn't yet, it's coming soon.
Oh, I thought I saw something that it was available
Yeah.
now.
The hold up with that for many years was you need an original signature in the law. So that's why it was never able to be done online. And well, not everyone in Maine yet has internet access, and internet access is not good everywhere, like including here at my house. So, you think about a logger who's, maybe an independent person, and it's another thing for them to learn, and that takes time. So, sometimes the old paper forms still work pretty well for people.
Okay.
What did I forget?
So far so good. I was just gonna comment, in normal years, we would have taken you to an active operation where you could see the actual layout of what they're doing, so we're just kind of talking about what they would normally do. But, ideally, we would have taken you somewhere where you could actually walk around and see how they've laid out the trails and what they're doing in terms of the harvest and that kind of thing. But there wasn't anything active really nearby.
Well, you saw the layout, the other day, and that would be pretty typical of what we do here. I mean, you could talk about that, Robin. Say we were doing a 10-acre shelter wood over there. Where would the trails come out? Where would the wood go? We sort of had a harvest right there.
Yeah, I mean, the wood would come to this road, for sure. And one thing we try to do is when we did the layout of this, we never want to try to lay the trails out so that they were looking like that trail right there. We have people walking in this area and we're walking down this road. We don't want to look down the trail. We don't want our folks to look down the trail. We try to lay in one main trail, maybe at a 90 degree from the main road. But off that trail, all the other trails would intersect with that trail and parallel the road so that you can't look down the trail. You can actually look through the trails and across the trails, which is a lot more sightly than trying to look down
Oh,
every
is that
trail
what
that
you're
came
looking
off.
at the deer?
Not that we want to hide the harvest, but what we wanted to see is the trees, not the skid trail. That's why we laid out like that.
The one thing you don't do, and I've learned more of this since Keith has been here, is you don't try to hide what you do. If you do a good job, you don't need to hide it. Bring your harvest rate to the road so people can see what you're doing. If you make it look good, that's what it should look like. It should look good. And you don't have to worry about that. But just little things like that, I don't know if there was any bumper trees in that layout that you looked in, but
No, those were cut to length systems, so.
yeah, in some instances, Charlie and I, even using a skidder, we'll have bumper trees on the corners where we pull the wood around. We might cut off a tree this high on the edge of the skid trail so that the wood will come around that and it doesn't interrupt all the regeneration within that area. If you didn't have that, it would just plow everything over when you're making those turns. So turn trees are real important on some of the jobs. And like Keith said, depending on what you're using, cut the length not so much because they're bunking the wood out of the wood. Not pulling the wood on the ground like the case skidder or a grapple skidder might do. So just little things like that are very important. The other thing you might think about if you were doing a harvest here, how far is the skidding distance? Is it closer to come here or is it closer to go to our next road over? So that's why mapping's pretty important. You look on your map, you can do a lot of that right in the office. You don't like skidding more than a quarter of a mile with this skidder, and that's far enough, even if you're pulling good wood. So if I had a road that was closer on the other side of my block, maybe I'd pull the wood that way. Do I have a brook that's there? Do I have to go across the brook? Can I get around the brook? How many times will I cross the brook? Try to minimize your crossing. If I could cross that brook in one place with a skid trail by putting in a skidder bridge or something like that, or put a brush in. You can put brush and wood in the brook as long as you take it out and you have good stream banks. You can do things like that also. So that's just a few of the things you have to think about when you do the layout.
Soils are important, so where a soil's wet, that I might want to avoid and may need to do something to so I don't sink in with the heavy piece of machinery, even though it's a little one, compared to some of them out there.
A lot of times you pull brush into the trail so you can walk on your brush, not just to make the site look a little cleaner, but just so that you don't do so much impact to the ground. And again, this isn't a heavy machine. It's about 15,000 pounds compared to some of the other machines that are 40,000, 30,000 in some of the pretty heavy machinery to be walking on bare ground.
It might be kind of hard for you to think of this as a small machine, but it is.
Very small.
It's very
It
small.
would be one.
It's a little.
One of the reasons we haven't replaced it is because we can't buy anything like it. Nothing you can buy today is anywhere near as light as the closest machine would probably be 10,000 pounds heavier. So, this is a real light footprint on the ground.
Guys, if you're out in the woods and you see one of these smaller machines like this, you can usually guess it's pretty old. They don't make them this size anymore, like he said, so we just keep bringing back the old ones and rebuilding them. If they blow motors, we put in new motors. They blow transmissions, we fix that too. I mean, there's machines running around that go back into the 60s, still in the woods.
I actually have a machine that I operated with when I was a contractor in 1968, and I still have it, still workable. It looks like it's a new machine actually.
Is it a skidder? What is it?
It's a skidder, cable skidder.
Oh, okay.
Two-farmer cable skidder. Yeah, 1968.
Well, it's partly a 68, right?
Well, it's like that old.
Got
that
multiple
old
parts.
big thing.
Yeah.
It's part 68, it's part 72.
It's pretty old, and it's just a good example of what you can do with old equipment if you take care of it.
Yeah, I know, they're sitting here looking at it.
Yeah, they've been slowly.
They're waiting for you to drop
circling.
it off.
They heard that the lunch bell was coming. Yeah.
Alright.
This is an area of a lot of recreation. Do you use other signage?
We do. So sometimes we need to close trails for safety reasons. So we work with the user group. So the Campus Rec maintains the trails on this side of Stillwater Ave. We maintain them on the other side. So we'll put up signs, and I'll let Jeff Hunt know, and also the Mountain Bike Club. I'll let them know, and they'll put it up on their Facebook pages and let their users know that we need to close the trail temporarily, just for safety reasons. We also try and put some signage up about what the harvest is, why we're doing it. Charlie's got a nice one he uses that says, "What the heck happened here?" and then kind of explain.
Not quite what it says.
And then it explains what we're doing and why we're doing it. We always put our phone number out there in lots of places. I'm a firm believer the more time you put your phone number out, the less people call. Because what gets people riled up a lot of times is sort of the unknown and the worry about what's happening. And when you explain it to them and give them the opportunity to call you, oftentimes they don't, because they've sort of had their fears explained a little bit, and that seems to work fairly well for us. We put a lot of signs up, put our phone number all over the place, and we get very few phone calls.
Which is sort of too bad, because we like talking about forestry.
Sometimes we do harvest tours, so like when we did the University Park harvest over here, we did a tour for the residents for two reasons. One, we didn't want people wandering around in the harvest area looking at the machinery on their own, so we figured we'd give them all an opportunity. And two, just because of the courtesy, because we're right behind their houses there cutting wood, figured we'd let them see what was happening and explain what's going on. Outreach is really important on high visibility forests like this.
Yeah, that would be a good example of when you talked about people like their trees.
Yep.
About the pine tree that was over there.
Oh yeah, the one call I did get was some guy called me in a panic because he placed his father's ashes under a certain special pine tree and didn't want us to cut it down. And it was somewhat miraculous they didn't mark the thing because it was a horrible, ugly tree that we'd usually take down to the plant. And for some reason I didn't paint it and we didn't cut it and everything worked out. You ever want to do that thing where you need permission from the landowner? I didn't make him sweep it out. But, you need permission from the landowner to put ashes on someone else's property.
And then tell them not to cut their trees
And then
down.
right. Yeah. People think this is a public forest. It's not. University is, although it's a public university, we're not technically like the Bureau of Public Lands or a national park or anything like that. We have different processes we have to go through, and people cannot do whatever they want out here. You want to build a trail, you gotta come see me.
I can't imagine there's a need for more trails. It seems
Well,
like there's a lot of them already.
If it was up to the mountain bikers, there would be one every 10 feet. So,
Yeah, we're constantly finding things in the woods here.
everybody sold for little huts over there, there's a whole mess of them on U5. Yep.
Do you have any
So-
questions about setting up a harvest? Any of the logistics? I mean, there's a whole course on this, basically. So this is just a really superficial treatment of this. So I don't know if you have any questions about. Next time, end of the semester, we'll talk more about the different and a feller buncher and all those good things. So we just have one machine today, but the university forest doesn't have a full squadron of logging equipment, so the budget isn't big enough.
I think you have a question over there.
So what is this machine called?
This is called a cable skidder.
Cable skidder?
Maybe this is a good transition into
Turn around
talking
and
about
talk
the cable
about it.
skidder.
Alright.
Perfect question.
Yes, so you want to talk about this a little
Yeah, go
bit?
ahead.
Yeah, sure. So as I said, this is a 1984 John Deere cable skidder. It's a dinosaur, and it's irreplaceable. If you replace it, it would be replaced with something as old as it is, probably. And we have replaced it once because we had a Timberjack with a Detroit engine, and if you know anything about engines, Detroit engines are probably the loudest machine in the world.
You can find your logger even if they're 3 pounds away.
Most of the time, the logger that runs that says counter log right there. That'd be me. Because I had a Detroit twice. So the university put me in the hearing conservation program, and after they did that, they decided the safety board, my director decided that we needed to buy a new machine. We tried to buy something new, equivalent to what we had, and we just couldn't do that. The weight of the machine, we wanted to keep the weight down. So we ended up buying this used machine, which is much more quiet. You hear it run very quiet. Probably, I don't even know if they make anything as quiet as this today.
How old was it when you bought it?
Probably 25 years old or 26 years old. We've had it for like 10 years, right? 12 years, so it was 25 years old when we bought it. And the thing about these machines, they're not like a vehicle, they don't depreciate a lot. So this machine is probably worth as much now as we paid for it then. We could get just as much out of it.
It might have gone up.
It might have. You see them all the time in some of the logging magazines, you know, 28,000, 35,000. So I can't remember exactly what we paid, 25 or 24.
Right. So in terms of logging equipment, these ones are probably without a doubt, this is the least expensive option. You can get into one of these for about the price of a used pickup truck. They're not real hard to move. You can move them with a dump truck and a trailer. If you've got one of these and you got yourself a collection of chainsaws, you can get in business. So, which is nice because if you don't have a huge monthly payment on the machinery, then you can afford to park them when it gets muddy. You can afford to not log sometimes to do something else. The other, especially when you start getting into that cut to length stuff, like we just had leave up on Sewell Road. I mean, they're talking about close to $1 million for that 2-piece machine. So yeah, these are nice. It's a nice entry level thing. It's an awful lot of work, a lot of physical work. The trees get cut down by hand. Everything gets done with a chainsaw. You're in and out and up and down that little 2-step ladder 100 times a day and pulling cables. People ask me if it's got a heater, AC. It doesn't even have a door.
One thing you don't need with this machine if you're working hard and trying to make a living with it, you don't need a heater. If you're gonna stay warm enough, just trying to stay being physical.
So maybe you want to explain what cable skidder does.
So what the cable skidder does is all this thing really should be used for is to pull wood from the wood. I tell everyone you shouldn't plow snow, you shouldn't build roads. We plow a little bit of snow with it, in the land.
Good for pushing rocks.
Yeah, but you really shouldn't do that. I mean, it's not what it's made for.
It's not a plow blade.
It's made for pulling wood, and that blade is really made for pushing wood up onto the pile. You can see it's not as wide as a skidder, so it's not really good for plowing snow. You're gonna walk out in the snow that you didn't plow. But you can plow snow around the landing with it if you need to, where you're bringing the wood out. But really, this machine is made to have this on it, which is a winch, which is right there, and a table with a series of chokers, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But this thing is made to pull wood to the landing, and really nothing else, any more than that, to push wood out. That's what it's made for.
Right, so with the motor running, we could show you this, but we could drop that main cable and haul that back. We just replaced this cable. What we put on there, 75 feet?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got a 75-foot main line on this.
This is the main line. It comes off the winch. That's a 5/8 cable.
Yep. And then off the back of it, we've got, we broke a few, so we're looking at half dozen or 8 of these, we call them chokers. So you run these out to your log, push push them around the log. You make a good log. Yeah, new demonstration log here. It's kind of dirty.
That's all right.
Yep. Hook it on like that, and then it acts as a slip choker.
Picture that.
Yeah. And that'll pull onto the butt of the log and pull it straight up to the machine. Now, if it's a big tree like the one we're going to cut now, I mean, that tree would be about all this machine would want to haul. In fact, we might take it in 2 pieces along the skid. If it's smaller wood, you know, regular size 20, 22 inch pine trees, you take 2 or 3 of them. If you're cutting that really small stuff, this thing can take a dozen chokers. What does this thing pull for weight?
Oh,
Put a couple cords on there, can you?
yeah, it'll probably pull a couple thousand, 1,000 pounds, something like that. You had to.
Yeah, it's a relatively simple machine. It's basically just a big tractor with a humongous.
Before we drop a tree and guys in camo hide.
Yeah, that would be good. A lot of moving parts on this forest.
Yeah, this is a great place to be a forester. It really is.
Was it this last section where they were out?
Yeah.
Yeah. They were out yelling and.
Yeah,
you know,
they use that loop
Yeah.
that we created, and they use that for various
some sort
training.
of counterinsurgency training and, you know, yelling bang, bang, bang at each other and yeah. It made for a fun lab. They're gonna have great stories to tell after this semester.
As long as there's nobody hiding right over there.
All right, so let's talk about the skidder a little more. So, one place you don't want to be standing when you're operating this machine is right here. Okay, because these wheels actually come together. The machine articulates in the middle, and that's why it gets around so well in the woods. Okay, it articulates like this. So it pivots right in the middle. It also oscillates on the front end for a better ride. So the front end will go like this also. Some of the old machines didn't oscillate like that. I can tell you, it was like riding a buckboard. It was really rough to ride. Once they came out with this, it was like riding in a Cadillac.
Just for conversation's sake, you could ride over either one of those 2 rocks over there and be pretty comfortable. I mean, you'd feel it,
So
but
you crawl up over it, and
Oh, yeah.
this wheel would come out, and you feel like you're going to tip over because the rear wheels don't do that. They're stationary. So when that gets up there like that, it gets kind of tippy. One thing about this machine is your seat set's very high in it. So when you're up in that seat, you're off the ground a long ways, and as soon as the machine starts to tip off, it feels like it's getting really tippy.
I drive it, if I run over an acorn, I panic.
But it's really not that bad. The stability is pretty good in it. Some of the older machines, the seats are down here, like in Timberjack, felt a lot more stable, but it was the same thing because you had the same size tires, the same size houses. But just one thing to think about, you know, if you're in the woods and you walk up to somebody on one of these, don't stand here and talk to them because this thing could come together. Okay?
and it doesn't have to be rolling to do it. It can turn just sitting still. It'll pivot. I don't know if you saw me move that rock off to the side, but you can pull up next to something, and just by turning the steering wheel, the whole machine will move sideways. It's a little unnerving if you're not used to it.
Yeah, one thing I should have mentioned right off the get-go is, I mean, most of you folks are going to be in the forest. You're going to be around equipment one time or another, whether it's harvesting equipment, road building equipment. Make sure you make eye contact with the operator. Do not try to walk by him. If you're coming up the road and he doesn't see you, and chances are he may not because he's thinking about what he's doing. So just stand there and wait, and when you make eye contact, he'll either put the bucket down from excavating or put the blade down and beckon you by. But don't try to go out around someone with a piece of forestry equipment or road building equipment. A lot of people get injured like that.
Yeah, it is a significant safety hazard. Your orange stuff will help you, but you really got to make sure that the operator sees you before you approach him.
Right. Make eye contact, you hand contact, make sure he knows where you're at.
Good keys trick. Throw a roll of flagging tape at the cab.
Yeah.
That really does work. It works great.
Yeah.
So this machine, it's about a 100 horsepower machine, which doesn't sound like a lot. But with the gear ratio that they put in these machines, it's pretty powerful.
But it's not fast. We figured that out driving it down here. Yeah. Top speed, felt like I was going in the Indy 500 and he's back behind me just like
It's about 15
15 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And that's as fast as you would ever want to go in this thing.
But it feels like 30 when you're sitting on it.
That
Kind
has
of
no doors.
well, you drove it.
Makes it seem like you're going faster. No
So-
windshield, no doors.
So I think this is the first year that they came out with a turbo. So this actually has a turbo on it. So it's 100 horsepower with a turbo, which increases the power a bit on it. And it's all the power you'd ever need to pull what we pull with it. And you'll see that Charlie's going to cut that last pine in there and we'll pull that out. And it has no difficulty hauling that whole tree. Usually what we do in the forest is cut that tree in 2 pieces and take it out like that instead of dragging a full-length tree. You do a lot less damage with 2 pieces instead of 1.
Anybody know why that is? Think about that for a second. See how tall that tree is that we're going to cut down? You figure that is about 100 feet anyway. Can you imagine trying to pull that whole tree around this 90-degree corner, where that would wind up? You know? Anybody here ever drive a truck with a trailer on it? Yeah. Okay, now you got a 100-foot trailer. Oh. There's no way we'd get that tree around this corner without hitting that tree right there with the arrows and the signs and all that stuff. You'd drag it right across those things and take the bark right off of it. So if you shorten your loads up a little bit, there's some other tricks too, but it's important to keep your loads as short as you reasonably can, and hopefully not to have to make too many 90-degree corners.
So one thing
so if
is,
you're laying out skid trails, don't put out 90s. Terrible.
so there's a few things this machine has to have to meet OSHA standards. So everything today in the forest has to meet OSHA standards. So it has to have a cab on it. It doesn't have to be a fully enclosed cab, but it has to have cab closure, has to have rollover protection that's worthy of the machine, which this does. And you see we've added screening to the front of the machine and the side. This actually came on it. And this screening here, to meet some of our state standards by some of the certifications that we have, you have to have front protection on it. So that was screened in when we got it, but if it wasn't, we would have screened that in. And even some of the older skidders like this have doors on it. I see skidders like this that have a sliding door here, which would probably a pretty good feature. I mean, it wouldn't keep you any warmer, but it would keep you safer. It would keep you from having sticks coming in. And a lot of times, in the winter time when it's coming, well, winter's coming, so we'll put chains all the way around this machine and it'll have 4 tire chains on it. It adds to your traction, but it also adds to the safety issue, with picking up debris on the chains, and it can come right up into the cab, so that's happened quite often.
Oh yeah.
Sticks get caught on there, so you got to be careful of that.
Yeah, you got to have your head on a swivel riding one of these things. It's not quite like driving around in the old family sedan.
So, what did I miss? So the blade, we talked about the blade. You know, really you should be just pushing wood to that, but occasionally we do smooth out the landing and push a little snow with it. We'll talk more about the winch when we hook onto the tree. We'll let Charlie cut the tree first, and when we're hooking up, we'll show you a couple different things that we do with the winch and a couple different hookups that we do just to make it a little bit easier sometimes for the log to roll over a tree or come around the corner. So we'll do some things like that too.
Want to move on to the tree?
Do you have a question?
Yeah, are the winch controls inside the cab?
Yes, the winch controls and the blade controls are right inside the cab. That's a good point because I can reach the winch controls from down here, but you think I should be operating the winch from here? No. I mean, there's times after we unhook and it's an empty spool and there's nothing on it. You can bring the winch up to hook your chokers up like we do. So with any weight on that winch, you should be operating everything from in the cab. Pretty dangerous.
There's a good reason for that too. If you got a log back there, and even if it's a fairly small log, if it catches on something that hooks up onto a stump, that winch is so strong it'll actually lift the front of this machine up. So if you're standing there holding onto the winch and you're right in front of that or right between those 2 tires, if the skidder gets moved, it gets dragged, you're gonna find yourself in a bad spot. So yeah, inside the machine when you're running it.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen machines. We've never broke the main cable, but I've seen people break these main cables in too. just pulling too hard with the load stock, and that's pretty dangerous. This thing, if this comes undone, you know, where's it gonna go? It's either gonna go that way or come right back into the cab, and that would rip that screening out of there in a heartbeat. So.
Yeah, this really will wheelie, this machine. It's impressive.
The older machine we had, we actually had a researcher or a developer come from Germany, and he designed a remote control winch for that. And I did time studies with that remote control winch. It was hooked onto my belt, and I was operating alone. And I could actually run the winch with a remote control from the ground, but I was away from the skidder when I did it. And it did increase productivity. It's just that it was pretty expensive to put the whole thing together. So.
It's easy to get into trouble, too.
Yeah. A lot of moving parts and a lot of electronic parts. So.
Does that cover the skidder? Should we move to the tree?
Let me ask them a question.
Sure.
So what do you think is the most dangerous profession in the state of Maine? Trivia. What's that? It's not forestry. Thankfully, it's not. You're on the right track. It's commercial fishing. Yep. So, the last time I checked, it's been several years. I should look this up again. I don't know if anybody knows, but logging actually was number 2.
It still is.
Still is number 2
Yeah.
in terms of injuries and fatalities. And Robin has spent a good chunk of his career trying to change that. Do you want to say more about
Well, yeah, it
how,
used to be
how
the
we're making the profession safer?
With the training, yeah. I think I spoke. Yeah, I think I spoke about the certified logging program and that training that took place. But back in around 1993, OSHA was pretty prevalent in the logging industry. And what happened back then was there was a lot of accidents, so that's why OSHA stepped in and got more involved with logging. And the logging rate went to about $46 a hundred. So every $100 of payroll, $46 of that out of your pocket went to workers' compensation. Almost 50% of your pay. And I mean, that affected me very hard because I was an independent logger at the time. And I was working on company land, so I was paying that 46%. So the certified logging program went to the Bureau of Insurance and said, if we can prove that we can change the safety in the state of Maine, will you drop our logging rates? But they didn't have a history yet, so it took 2 or 3 years to do that. So after the certified logging program got involved and started training loggers, they proved that they could bring the safety, the accident rate down, which we did. And in the first 3 years that we trained people, we brought it down to $28 a hundred, which was huge. So then we kept training folks. We got more people involved in the program. Probably, I'm going to say like 80% of the loggers were involved in that CLP program at the time. And we ended up getting the rate down to $16 a hundred. That was manageable. You could make money then. You know, you didn't have to pay out all that insurance payroll. So that was about the time that I got involved and started training loggers. And we did a lot of in-woods training with the loggers. We brought a Swede here called Soren Eriksson. I don't know if you folks have ever heard of him, but he was a trainer from Sweden. And we kind of adapted to his way of training and the what do I want to say, techniques that he used. So we adapted to the game of logging techniques for felling trees, which was very systematic and very easy to train. Charlie still trains it today. We all do. We train all our students in game of logging, and most of the loggers in the state now, without even going to train someone, you can tell if they're using that technique or not just by looking at the log pile. So, and that's sort of how everything, changed. We got the training started in the state of Maine, and it's still taking place today. So it's a good thing to have, and I was glad I was involved with that. So.
Well, that dropped us from the most dangerous job in Maine to the second most dangerous.
Right.
So that's pretty good.
What we should say though is that is for conventional logging. Mechanical logging,
Right.
so when you're in the machine, in the cab, the injury rate for mechanical logging is lower than combined rate for all other jobs. So the injury rate, if you take all other the professions and look at just the mechanical loggers, injury rate there is lower than for everybody else combined.
Why do you think that is?
Stay in the cabinets this way.
Yep.
Yeah,
in the machine.
mechanized people, you know, most of their injuries are slips and falls, getting in and out of the machine.
The most dangerous part of a feller buncher is getting out of it.
It is. It is, actually. And I mean,
It sounds funny, but it's true.
and not only that, I mean, there's training now, you know, there's not just certified logging, but there's other training organizations now who do training for mechanized equipment, which has made a huge difference in the comp rate too. So.
Do they do tree crash testing on new equipment like they do with cars? And like, well, let's see if we drop a 100-foot tree on this cab, will it protect the operator? Do they do things like
I'm sure
that?
they've tested that. Just the same as we tested chaff back in the days, cutting with a chainsaw. We didn't do it on someone's leg, but we did test it. Tested boots, we tested chaff. We did a lot of testing, chainsaw testing, you know, against safety equipment. So that's really what sparked the whole safety and, you know, the training in conventional logging. The comp rate just went, it skyrocketed so bad that you saw a lot of the people get out of the hand felling and things like that, you know.
So loggers that are interested in this, is there like annual workshops normally that where this
There
happens?
is. The Certified Logging Program holds recertifications for people who already are certified, and they hold certification programs for people who want to get certified, or there are just folks out there like Charlie who do training for different organizations like Sloan and things like that. Charlie had done some of that. So that's all available if folks want to get chainsaw training.
I think the most likely thing to kill a conventional logger these days is old age.
Yeah. You know, the issue right now is we can't find enough conventional loggers to work for us. We only have one conventional logger who does work for us right now, and we have a hard time trying to find anyone else. They're just not out there. People have aged out, and no one else has kind of stepped in. And as Charlie said, it's very easy to get started. You go buy a machine for $20,000, a couple chainsaws, and get some training. It's hard work, but you can make a living doing it. And the people who still have cable skidders and who are working, those are the guys who know how to do it, and they do it right, and they get a lot of work.
They
We could
fill a
actually-
special niche now in the industry too.
What's that?
I said these folks that have these smaller machines can fill a special niche
They
in
do,
the market.
and that
right?
need is still there. You know, riparian zone work. I mean, you can pull a cable into a riparian zone and pull wood out of it. You know, around water corridors and things like that, where big equipment can't go.
Anything south of Augusta.
And
Anything
that work is there.
Oh yeah. And a lot of the wood that's in the state of Maine is not in the big woods in the north. A lot of the wood is, of course, it's on those smaller lots in the south.
It's tough for us sometimes because we have some areas that are, like we do a lot of work on the Penobscot Forest over there that manage. We do the management of it, but the Forest Service actually lays it out because it's under some of their experiment stations. And some of that wood is, you know, you just can't get a cut-to-length machine or a whole tree operation over there because there's not enough volume. And we try to get a cable skidder in there, and the wood's really not good enough for them, but there's no competition, so sometimes we give that wood away just for the experiment to get cut. And that's the way it's been for the last 20 years over there.
And sometimes we cut it.
And sometimes we cut it, which we don't like
We
doing
pay to get
because
it cut.
it just doesn't add to our budget. So.
Should we talk about tree felling?
Let's talk about tree felling. First, let's talk about this tree. Move this down to this tree, I think.
Let's go look at the tree you selected today.
Well, this one sort of selected itself a little bit.
Oh, I see. Some prep work has been done already.
Dr. Wason's lab out here, and he needed an oak tree for a particular experiment he was doing. So that's his oak tree. They took little discs out of it and sampled it.
Oh, yeah.
Did all sorts of
So
scientific.
this is all fitting together nicely.
It is, because this tree is going to make one hell of a hole when it hits the ground. This is one of the bigger trees we'll cut around here. This is a big one.
So why have you chosen this one?
All right, so we chose this tree for a couple of reasons. First and foremost, half of it's already on the ground over there. It's double top, it's split. It is right next to a walking trail. It's going to become a significant hazard at some point as it continues to degrade and fall apart on the walking trail. So, one, it's just going to be safer. Two, I would say economically that tree is about as good as it's going to get. And it really isn't very good. It's big, but it's not good. So, it's not aesthetically nice. It's not real valuable, and it's not getting any more valuable. Plus, we need a big tree to cut down for your lab. It kind of all adds up.
And Charlie likes cutting big trees.
I do like cutting big trees, although I don't like limbing big trees, and this one's going to be.
Can you say something about how you assess whether it's a valuable tree or not?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with Eastern White Pine, this is a grade that, or there's a tree that's graded log by log. Every single log out of every tree comes graded differently, and it's based on the value of the tree is based on the number of knots that it has and the type of knots that it has. Also, how straight the log is. So, if you look at the base part of this tree up until, I don't know, far up as you can realize, 20, 25 feet or so, it's actually pretty straight, right? It doesn't swerve around, it doesn't taper much. It's a nice straight tree, but what has it got an awful lot of? Dead branches. And dead branches lead to what's called black knots in wood. Okay? When the tree grows around a dead branch, it doesn't really, it doesn't mesh well, it doesn't seam in well. So the knot that's in the wood is going to have a black ring around it, or it's going to be dark colored. And when it dries, they shrink differently, and a lot of times those knots will fall out. So if you go to buy a board and it's got a hole in it that's that big, it's not a very valuable board. Now, if you get up there to where the branches start having live needles on them again, those branches haven't died yet, so those ones will have what's called red knots. And you see this all the time, knotty pine paneling. It's got big red knots in it, and it's all through. It's actually kind of nice, and the knots don't fall out. So that's really key. So, ideally, we like to see trees with either no knots on them at all, no branches, very, very few of these dead branches, which make black knots, and then the rest is as many red knots as we can. So from that perspective, this tree sucks. This tree is horrible. That's a technical term. It'll be on the test. This tree is going to make an awful mess.
Normally, what part is the most valuable part of the tree?
Ordinarily, the best part is right up until the first black knot. So for this tree, if we could sell shorter logs, we could get a nice select grade up about, I can reach about 8 feet. Maybe we'll get an 8-foot select out of this, but they don't take those. I had a question? Yes.
Actually, my question was going to be, since this tree is like this, would the top be more valuable
Then the middle?
than
Yes. Yeah, they're sort of upside down. Ideally, we'd like to see it go the most valuable parts at the bottom, the second most valuable parts at the top, and then that middle section is the least valuable, right? So, well, let's see, there's loads of pine trees around here, but actually, not a lot of these are all that great.
Yeah, we're too close to the edges of roads.
Yeah.
Yeah, they don't have much.
Yeah, and white pine's funny that way. You can do a lot better job at pine if you prune the dead branches off as high up as you could reach. We do a lot of that on the forest.
And that's sometimes something you can do silviculturally, is kind of encourage this kind of self-pruning or having neighbors that help encourage it to drop those limbs.
Yeah.
So there's some things you can do silviculturally, but there's a limit to how much you can do with that.
Yeah, particularly with white pine, it doesn't self-prune very well. Now, there's a great example of a red pine right over here. You see that one?
Mm-hmm.
it's the shade. They've got a very low tolerance for shade, so the branches die off fairly quickly on red pine. But they sort of self-prune better. You see, that one doesn't have a lot of big dead branches on it. It's got some up there where they died sort of more recently, but most of the bottom of it, they've already rotted and fallen off. Hardwood self-prune really well in general. White pine is not. So it's got an irritating sort of middle of the range shade tolerance and very, very good resistance to decay. So if the branches died, those things have been dead for years and they just don't rot. So sort of wish they would. So this is not going to be a particularly valuable tree. I mean, they'll be able to saw boards out of it, and when it hits the mill, you know, they've got some optimizing programs and some scanners and stuff that say, you know, if they've got a board that's that wide and it's got a knot here and a knot here, then they could get a skinny one out of the middle maybe. And, you know, they'll make good stuff out of it. But there'll be a lot of small pieces. Yes.
So, like, how deep do the knots typically go into the? Is it just depends on the size of the knot?
They originate at the core, right? Yeah. Yes, they do originate at the core of the tree. So I guess the farther up they go, that's a kind of a physiology question. It would be a good question for a physiologist.
Yeah, so pine generally does not produce branches below the growing tip, right? Some trees will epicormic sprout, and you know the U buds under the bark will produce new branches. Pine does that a little bit, but not very much. So basically, the branch originates up at the top, and that next whirl of when the leader's elongated, that's when the branch starts. So if you follow those black knots in, they're going to go right to the center, but at some point, towards the center of the log, they're going to turn back into red knots because they were alive at some point. So sometimes the grade of the tree actually goes up if you saw into the center of it on a tree like this.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
My answer would have been right to the end. You asked how far it was in, I would have said right to the end.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Twice as far as half a branch. All right, so from your escape plan, you want to have a backup escape plan. And usually what we want to do is 45 degrees backwards away from the tree, plus or minus. You don't necessarily want to try and go directly behind the tree because it can, on occasion, do some really inconvenient things like go straight backwards. They can jump the stump, they can barb a chair, they can do all sorts of evil things. So backwards better than forwards, but nothing's better than 45 away. It would be very, very difficult for this tree to get me over there. We are going to fell this using the Swedish technique that he was talking about. I'm going to open face notch this and establish a hinge thickness. So this whole tree is going to be attached to the stump on a hinge. This is a big tree, so we're going to have to leave a pretty substantial hinge. And if we get it just right, that hinge is going to fold, and this tree is going to hit the ground before that hinge breaks. And if we're really lucky, the hinge might not break at all. It might actually hold until it gets to the ground.
It's going to break.
It'll break, yeah.
This one.
Yeah. Well, something's going to break.
But as Charlie cuts the tree, we're just going to go step by step. He'll cut the notch, we'll stop and talk about that. And you can see how systematic this whole thing is going to be. Just as he talked about the 5 points of felling before he started. It's all a system.
Yeah, I'm going to have to
Very,
centerboard
very-
this.
Yeah, maybe.
That is a big piece of wood.
Maybe. Unless it's hollow, they won't have to.
Huh. It's entirely possible that this tree is hollow. So I guess we'll see shortly. So yeah, I'm gonna cut a big open face notch out of here, bore into it, establish a hinge thickness. Right? I'm not just gonna start at the back and start Yahtzeeing my way through this thing. Okay. By the time I get to actually cut the back of this wood, it's gonna be set up to go. So I'll establish my hinge will be exactly where I want it before I start really thinking about getting this tree on the ground. Then you cut from the middle, you cut out and leave a whole bunch of holding wood back here. So that sets the tree up. It's sitting there on its hinge, right, which is going to be, 2 inches wide, at a full width of 80% of the width of the
How
tree.
do you decide the width of your hinge?
Because I've been doing this a long time. And the whole back strap of this tree, and you know, if everything goes right, this tree will stand right here. You know, we can double check to make sure that the rangers haven't moved back in, or that we don't have a jogger coming back in. You can thumbs up everybody. This tree is going to stand here, and it's not going to go until you want it to go. we can pull the saw out of the curve, tap some wedges into it. You don't really need wedges on this guy, but I'll put them in there anyway just to show you how to do it. And then when everything's ready to go, when you're ready to go, cut the hole in the wood and off it goes.
So Amber, to answer your question, on this tree, you know, 80% is that's your goal. You need 80% hinge of the size of the tree. So if you had a 10-inch tree, you'd have 8 inches of hinge. On this tree, that rule doesn't apply really.
Not really.
This is a huge tree. And you think about having, let's say it's 30 inches. And if you had 80% of that, and you left a 2-inch hinge, and let's say you compress that, how long is the hinge going to be? 26 inches? If you had a 26-inch hinge and you compress it with 2 inches wide hinge, I mean, you're going to have an 8x8 holding that tree up, which is way more than you need. You don't need that much hinge. So you could reduce the hinge size to this to probably 60% and still handle the tree easily because it's such a long hinge. You're going to leave 2 inches anyway. And you'll see how that all works when Charlie sets it up. But as he mentioned, you know, a lot of folks who don't have chainsaw experience or who are homeowners, they'll take a tree. Let's take that one for instance right there. That little maple that's probably about 12 inches. So the landowner's going to cut that. He's going to cut it in the direction of fall, right? He's not going to try to wedge it because he doesn't know how to use a wedge anyway. So you make the knot. Where do you start cutting? From the back, right? That's all you know how to do. What's going to happen when you get halfway through that tree? What's the tree doing?
Oh, fall down.
You don't want to go front with it because you already cut half the tree. So what's the chainsaw out there? You're still cutting. As soon as the tree starts to go, he's going to run away and you're still going to have this much of the tree not cut. That part of the tree is going to stay straight out. The back part is going to break off. And that's how people get hurt. That piece is going to go way up in the air and it's going to come down. And where are you going to be standing? Probably right under the tree. So Charlie's method when he talks about before cutting the tree, depends on what fiber you're cutting too. You have to know that.
If you're cutting hardwood, you have to go with really, really thin hinges or they'll split.
White birch is a good example. I mean, you try to, you know, if you're cutting a 16-inch white birch, 18-inch white birch, it's going to be a veneered log, which is real high value. You leave an inch hinge, that thing's going to split. You just lost it. You don't even have a log anymore. Really, really, you got to think about the tree you're cutting and how thick that hinge is going to be and what kind of fiber you have too. That's really important.
Right on. Now this tree is big enough. I'm not 100% convinced that I'm going to be able to get the bar of my saw to the exact center of this tree, even if I go from both sides. So I'm going to have, just for the sake of safety, I'm going to go ahead and throw what's called a center bar on here. So after I put the open face notch on it, I'm going to get on the front of it and knife through it from the front, which is, it's a safe technique, but you have to know in advance that you're going to do that because obviously you don't want to do it when it's too late, right? You don't want to be in the direction of fell when you're already cut through the back of the tree. I mean, for obvious reasons. So if this has got a you know, a section in the middle, even if it's only that big around, it's the size around of a baseball, and you can't get to it with the bar of the saw, this tree is going to have an awfully hard time falling over, a really hard time falling over, because wood is its strongest in its tensile. Right? You can snap a mop handle, right? Have you ever tried to pull one in half? That would be what you're trying to do here, because as the tree is hinging over, you know, anything that's not on that hinge, it's trying to pull those fibers. They're enormously strong that way. So it becomes a very, very long day for me. I have to do that. And it's much more damaging to the tree as well. Okay. So that's the short version.
You spend 4 days on this if you want to do the full thing.
Yeah. Is there anything else we need to cover before we
And
start?
your chainsaw roadie is bringing the saw down.
Is there any particular safety gear you might need?
Oh, flip-flops.
Shorts, Bermuda shorts, sunglasses.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
You see guys out in their backyards sometimes just
Wine
going.
cooler in one hand.
The boat.
So, yes, obviously there's safety gear involved. Hard hat is the bare minimum. I don't cut down a shrub in my backyard without cutting chaps on. These things I'm wearing around here, they don't just look fabulous. They've got a cut resistant, not cut proof. They are cut resistant. That saw he's bringing down here will go through this like at full RPM. They'll cut right through these. Cut resistant boots. These ones are Kevlar lined, steel toed. I got enough Kevlar on to stop a 9mm, but it won't stop that chainsaw. It will slow it down. These things have got long fibers. It might remind you of dental floss, sort of. And if you cut into your chaps, I'm trying to see if this has got any holes in them at all. I can show you. Nope, good. It does. It pulls these fibers out. They're a really loose weave inside there. So if the teeth pulls a bunch of fiber out, gets it in the sprocket, and jams the saw shut. And it's like any other safety device. It's like the seatbelt of your car. I mean, sometimes it's going to work. Most of the time it's going to work. Sometimes it's not going to, but you never, ever, ever want to live by that. Right? So your safety gear is only there for when things go catastrophically wrong. Really, it is. It's a lot like your car's airbag. Right? You don't want to drive like a lunatic because you've got an airbag. It's the same thing with ease. The best training, the best safety thing you've got really is your training. Oh yeah, we got eyes, we got ears, we got cool stuff.
So all the safety gear you buy has a UL listing on it. That means that it's been tested. And there is gear out there without a UL listing. Don't buy that gear. If it doesn't have the UL label, don't buy it.
Who wants to go old school with me? We got a while left, right?
And that's it. You just remember that all this gear that's tested, like the chaps, the boots and things like that, all that stuff is tested at about half throttle on that chainsaw, not full throttle. Because what they're thinking is, if you hit your chap with your chainsaw, you're going to let off the trigger. So when they test it, instead of being 14,000 RPM to 7,000 RPM. So it probably didn't cut through at that speed, but at full throttle, it probably might cut through the chap.
Definitely would. They could make gear that is chainsaw proof, but it would be so heavy you wouldn't be able to wear it.
Be like
no,
your
really, and
armor.
it would
Be like
it would
armor.
cause a different injury. It would just be so stressful on your body you couldn't do it.
And as Charlie said, polyester, those have polyester inside. Don't buy Kevlar, buy polyester.
Right.
Kevlar is made in layers, like bulletproof vests, so that, that really just stops the bullet, stops the pain, but it doesn't pull fiber like polyester does. So pretty important to buy that kind of chap rather than the Kevlar chap. Hope I don't put those folks out of business.
They're doing okay just making canoes. Okay. So, like I said, I'm gonna fire this up. This saw is fairly loud, so
Is there anything you should check on your chainsaw before you just start using it?
how long do you want this lab to be?
Well, you don't have to spend an hour on it. This is not a chainsaw, service class, but
Of course, there are safety features to the chainsaw. Chain brake being. Oh, chain runs, chain turns, chain doesn't turn. That's a big one. Chain brake. This one's got one that's built into the handle too, sort of on its last legs, but that's supplement. You don't really need it. You do want to make sure it's sharp enough to get through the wood. This one's okay, and it's not super loose. That chain, I can pull a driver out. I can drive two out, but you don't want them looping way down like that. That's how they fall off. Incidentally, you don't want it too tight either. Costs you power, binds up, smokes, bad things. It's got a couple other safety things on here too. Spark arresters and spikes to offset. There's handle protectors back here to keep it from, if the chain does fly off, it doesn't come down here and slap you in the wrist. There's an aluminum chain catcher right here that does the same thing.
A lot of times those get broken off.
They do, and you really want to replace them. They're very cheap.
Very important.
That's why I mentioned that.
Yeah, wow, the great segue then.
I've been
'Cause
paying attention.
That can save your chainsaw. To not have the chain catcher on there, your chain can come around, hit the gas tank, and then you got to replace the whole body of the saw, or the chain could come around and slap you in the arm. It doesn't happen as much as it used to because you have the protector underneath, but it still can happen. So
Yep.
that needs to be in place. Very important.
And if OSHA comes around and tells you this and you still don't do it, like some particular company, you get slapped with an enormous fine. So
$20,000, I think.
$20,000? Wow.
That's a lot for. I mean, what's that aluminum piece cost?
I was
About
gonna say that's
$6.
you could get a cable skidder, or you could get a little piece of aluminum.
Or a $6 piece of aluminum, right?
Maybe at $4 actually. They're pretty cheap.
Yeah, they're cheap. And so OSHA is usually pretty cool. If they find you if they find something that you're missing, they'll usually tell you. But if you just blow them off, yeah, don't do that.
So one of the biggest issues when I started training loggers, and you got to remember that I was trying to train 50 and 60-year-old men and 45-year-old men instead of students like yourself. It was much harder to train because they already knew all there was to know about a chainsaw, they thought. I was trying to get them to use the chain brake, and it's the easiest thing in the world to use. You watch Charlie when he uses that. When he sets the saw down and you put it on, all you do is snap your wrist. But to get someone to use that thing, you should never walk with the chain brake off. You should always have it on. Any more than 2 or 3 steps, you might want to have it on.
The old guys would cut them off because they got in the way.
They would. They'd take them off the saw, you know.
Yep.
But that's the easiest thing in the world to use, and do not run a chainsaw without one. You know, if it does not have a chain brake, it's out of service as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, these are set up to go off, by the way, inertia-wise too. Right? They. Anybody know what a saw kickback is? Yeah, a few of you guys do. Okay, well if I had this saw running at full tilt and I was just jamming into this tree like this, particularly this top tip, just the geometry of the teeth changes as it goes around the top of the corner. So what would be a safe amount of wood for the blade to cut, all of a sudden the depth gauge, which is in front of it, isn't there anymore. It's going to try and cut a whole lot more wood than it's capable of doing. Okay, it's only supposed to take a couple of thousandths of an inch. It's going to take 3 or 4 times that, and it can't. So it throws it back to you, and it goes off pretty hard. It happens once in a while. Usually you're like bucking logs in a pile, and you reach through one log, and you don't see another one behind it, and you hit it in the tip, and it just bang. I mean, it comes back hard. So, and that's another one of the ways that people used to get injured, sometimes even killed. So if you get it right, with that much force, that chain brake just kicked on. Now, that's a safety system on an old saw that vibrates, it's covered in grease, and it's been blasted through trees for 10 years. Not something you want to trust. So this one's still working, but they can and will eventually fail. If you get one with your chain, say you pick up your granddad's old saw and the chain brake just constantly pops on, take it to a shop and have it fixed. Right? You don't just tie the handle back to override the, right? And you see guys do this, and sometimes you see them with body parts in the hospital.
So what happens when you pick up your car and you don't use the emergency brake? What happens with the emergency brake? When you go to put it on a year later and you haven't used it.
When you go to get your sticker, it's rusted up.
It doesn't work, right? Same way with that brake. If you don't use that brake, it's going to get full of grease and full of oil and debris, and it won't work. The more you use it, the better it is. Just like your emergency brake on your car.
That's absolutely right. Yes?
Do you guys often get new chainsaws, or can you use old chainsaws too?
We run these pretty much until they blow. Then we replace them.
What's the lifespan of a chainsaw?
Oh, that all depends on who's using it.
Yeah, I guess you have students, so
If you're an everyday logger and you cut 40 cord of wood or 50 cord of wood a week, you might get a year out of it, but probably not. 9 or 10 months, and then it's ready for a new one, usually.
Yeah, the commercial guys will replace them manually. I do know guys that'll own 2. Always got to keep at least 2 chainsaws, and they'll take their new one, run it for a year, boot it back to their backup saw, keep it for another year, and then sell it.
The junket, use it for parts.
Yeah.
A lot of loggers will buy the same brand, same size, and they have a part saw. You break a chain brake, you can use that off your saw.
Oh yeah, and if you think the old Ford, Chevy, Dodge debate is a hot topic, you should see the guys with the John Sureds versus the Husqvarnas versus the Steels there. They're all good. They're all really the same thing.
They're all terrible when they don't run.
Right.
All right, Charlie, I think you can proceed now.
Okay.
So
Well-
we can all stay right here. You don't have to move while he's running the
Not
saw,
yet.
because he's going to make the opening first.
Been a little funky, Robin. Big hinges are a pain in the ass. All right. I did this with an axe, by the way, so I can not overcut my hinge. It's real important that this piece and this piece meet each other almost perfectly at a 90-degree angle or so. And it's a whole lot easier with a small tree, but when you have to come in from both sides, it's a little challenging. And if you overcut too far one way or the other, you get what's called bypass. I don't really care what the piece that's coming out looks like. That can come out in 100 pieces, but I really need that opening to be a nice, neat 90. Right? Robin, would you put my gas? Come on. Okay. Now, in a perfect world, I'd have been able to do that in 4 easy cuts, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And for competition purposes, and we do practice this, and we have a fun competition with it. That's what we're aiming for. But if it doesn't go that way, it's kind of okay. As long as the end result is this. All right. So, like I showed you before, when we get ready to cut this piece right here is going to fall, and because we've got about a 90-degree angle here, this tree will get all the way to the ground by the time that those two pieces come together. That's really important. Okay, so if you were to make a much more shallow cut, say you were to just cut in like this, and have yourself a 40 or 50-degree angle, and you back up the tree just like we told you, the tree would make it about halfway down and be moving when those two pieces come together. Now, wood doesn't compress any better than it separates under tension. So you can't, if you think it's hard to pull a board apart, try pressing one apart, right? So the two pieces are going to hit. They're not going to compress. The tree is obviously going to keep going. It's going to break your hinge completely off. That's the only thing that can happen. It'll pop your hinge, and then it's going to go where it wants to go instead of where you want it to go. So it's important that you get a 90-degree or close to a 90-degree opening on flat level ground. Be a little different if you're doing this out west and you're going to follow it off a 80% slope. No way you could get it to hit the ground there. So they do things different. But here, where it's relatively flat, this technique works pretty well.
So, how many folks here run a chainsaw? Have run a chainsaw?
Cool.
So, when you fell a tree, did you make your bottom cut first or your top cut first? Top cut? Okay.
Good.
Why do we make that top cut first? Exactly. See,
Yeah.
the wood down in that cut and see when the bottom cut comes in. I mean, it's still okay to make the bottom cut first. It's just much easier to make the top cut first and make it correct. Because a lot of times when you make that bottom cut, then you make your top cut. You cannot make those meet without trying 5 or 6 times to clean it up in there. And it's just time consuming to do that. So now he has a nice open face notch, which, you know, back in the olden days we just made a 45-degree cut. We'd let the tree go, and like Charlie said, when that 45-degree notch closed up, the tree broke, and you don't have any more control over the tree. He's got about 100-degree opening. It's more than 90 because it comes up from the bottom a little bit. So on a flat surface with a 100-degree opening, the tree is actually going to hit the ground before that face closes up, right? And as Charlie said, if you were felling downhill, you'd even want to open that up more than that, so the tree would give the tree more time to hit the ground before it busts off the hinge. So that's a really good notch right there.
Well, thank you. It's my first time. I tried it on YouTube.
So now, for those of you who haven't seen a bore cut tree before, instead of cutting from the back, he'll bore right in the side of the tree and set his hinge up on the back of that notch and completely make his hinge before he does anything else. And that way that's all done, and he can finish cutting the tree after that. So you're still good to stay right where you're at. He's just going to
I am going to center bore
Unless you
this.
want to see what he's doing on that side.
I am going to center bore this just because of the way it's really thick right here.
So he's going to center bore the tree, and when he talks about doing that, what he's going to do is stand in front of the tree like this, take the tip of the bar and bore right in that tree, but don't make the opening any bigger than the bar. And when he gets the bar in there, he's just going to swivel the bar like this to cut the middle of the tree out, and that way there, when he bores it in from this side, he'll be able to reach that hole. Because what he's afraid of right now is he's not going to be able to bore from both sides and make those meet, which he probably can't.
That's an 18-inch bar, and if that tree is 37 inches, that's the problem once we do this.
You can cut a 40-inch tree with an 18-inch bar if you know how to do it, but you got to center bore like Charlie's going to do. You'll just swivel around with it, okay?
Super important that you do this first.
Yeah, don't do it after, because if you don't get through, then you're standing in front of the tree where you shouldn't be.
Nice and white.
Solid in the middle.
Yep.
How about
I don't know if you guys heard that, but you can tell by the color of the sawdust if this tree is any good in the middle or not. And it's good. Yeah.
that? You don't like to see red or brown.
And we don't like it to go whoo, because then you got nothing.
Sometimes water comes out.
Yeah, that's neat. Yeah, that'll happen sometimes.
Come on over on this side, because we're going to have to be here when he cuts the other side.
Are we going to put somebody down this trail so we don't squash anyone?
Yeah, we will.
I got on it, Bill.
Alright.
Put someone up on this end.
And I can see where Charlie bored into the tree. you look where he made his initial bore right here, so it's about, that's about 1.5 inches wide. So he bored straight in, trying to stay 1.5 inches from the face all the way to the middle of the tree. So this side of the hinge is all set up, right? He's not going to be chasing the hinge on this tree, cutting it in the back. He'll do the same thing on the other side and set a wedge, bore out the back, and then when he gets near the back, he'll stop, put a wedge in, and then he can cut from the back, and he'll be behind the tree where he should be when he finishes the cut. So when that tree starts to go, he's going to know it, and he can go that way, and he'll be far enough out of the way so that none of the debris from the tree or anything is going to hit him.
Okay, so guys, while we're on that topic, this is important, all right? So listen up. We've got an awful lot of dead branches up here. We've got a whole bunch of live trees over there. What happens when we fell, and this has got a tremendous crown on it, when we fell this tree through the branches of that one, these things are going to break off, okay? That's an oak right there. That's really strong wood, so it's also very springy. What'll happen is some of those dead branches are going to get broken off in that oak tree as it's getting pushed down, pushed down, pushed down, and eventually it's going to fall through, and that tree is going to come back. That is going to throw stuff, and it's going to throw it here, okay? So one of the reasons we like to move away from the tree, it's not just this thing that'll get you, it's all that little crap and the little things that you won't see. A branch this big coming down from 100 feet will knock the hell out of you, okay? Hard hat or not, that's going to hurt a lot. Without a hard hat, it can kill you. So if you happen to see a piece of wood coming out of the sky and coming towards you, don't wait for somebody to tell you to move. Right? You have to be your own safety advocate here, okay? Get out of the way. And do it quickly. So I'm going to be boot-footing that way. Everybody wants to see the tree go down, right? Everybody wants to see the tree hit, but the really dangerous part is going to be coming from straight up. So when this goes, please move your feet, keep nimble, keep your eyes up, because that's where it's coming from. So far, to date, well, so far today anyway, we haven't killed a single student.
We're gonna keep that record.
Well, the day ain't over.
No, I'm confident we're gonna keep that record today.
All right, so we've got scouts out both that direction and that direction. They both know that the only safe place that they can be is 2 tree lengths away. All right, that's OSHA standard. For today, I think, and a tree this size, folks, I got to have you back out on the other side of those rocks. I mean, you can wait for a sec, but when I wave you out of here, that's where y'all need to be.
Okay. And the camera?
Hey, my camera.
Okay.
I don't want it to break. Where actually would you, where would you put it?
Actually, that's probably not a bad spot. You might back it up just a little bit, but that tree is going down here. If you can back it up a few feet, you know, every foot's safer.
Okay.
I'm going to have to get a little bit of this out of the way. I've got this thing. I got to do a little bit of work here first.